Did you know, near the towns of East Haddam and Lyme, Connecticut has its own castle and shipwreck? Gillette Castle, built and designed in 1914, recently underwent an $11 million restoration. It sees 350,000 visitors annually, many of whom are ghost hunters. Is this large gray stone castle and its expansive grounds haunted? Actor William Gillette's castle, called the Seventh Sister and renamed Gillette Castle by Connecticut State in 1943, was built between 1914 and 1919, with an addition completed in 1924 on a 184-acre tract at the top of the southernmost of a chain of hills known as the Seven Sisters by the Connecticut River. Gillette died, leaving no wife or children, and his will precluded the possession of his home by any, quote, blithering saphead who has no conception of where he is or with what surrounded. The state of Connecticut took over the property in 1943, renaming it Gillette Castle State Park. It was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1986. Step from the grand stone portico of Gillette Castle into the 50-foot-long great room with its dramatic balcony and 6-foot-wide fireplace, and you enter the imagination of a quirky and creative genius. Hartford-born actor William Gillette was perhaps the country's most famous stage celebrity of the first third of the 20th century, the Elvis of his era. Anyone entering the towering German medieval-style structure, perched on a Hadlime hill overlooking the Connecticut River, feels the inventor-actor's presence. The man who performed more than 1,300 times as Sherlock Holmes and gave us the London sleuth's iconic image, deerstalker hat, curved pipe, suave dressing gown, and "Elementary, my dear Watson," died in 1937, but has never left the building, according to many. You can learn more about his relationship with the most photographed actress, Maud Feely, in her video on this channel. According to the Hartford Courant, Gillette's presence has not only been felt, but hundreds of people have cited a flickering, diaphanous image of the man on castle grounds. Could this be Gillette or his valet? Or perhaps it is not a man, but a woman, and it is Mrs. Gillette who died in Connecticut. Gillette originally planned to build his retirement home on Long Island until he discovered the cliffs of the Seven Sisters while traversing the Connecticut River in his second houseboat, Aunt Polly, or on a tour, accounts differ. He and his Japanese manservant ran the houseboat Aunt Polly themselves, and this 100-foot-long steamship included a shell mosaic, fireplace, and sleeping quarters. Perhaps in a show of transition, Aunt Polly burned in 1932, and its shipwreck can still be seen today on the Connecticut River. Gillette designed the castle and personally overlooked every phase of the 24-room structure. Construction was performed by the Porteous Walker Company, a leading contracting and woodworking firm based in Hartford, Connecticut, founded by Gillette's childhood friend, Robert Porteous. It has been described as designed in a medieval Gothic or an American fairy tale mixed with European flair style, or as Gillette's Folly. Gillette was born in 1853 in Nook Farm, Hartford, Connecticut, a literary and intellectual center with residents such as Mark Twain and Harriet Beecher Stowe. You can learn more about Mark Twain on this channel. The area was also a hotbed for abolitionists. Gillette's father, Francis, had been a United States Senator for Connecticut and a crusader for public education, temperance, the abolition of slavery, and women's suffrage. His mother, Elizabeth Daggett Hooker, was a descendant of the Reverend Thomas Hooker, the English-born Puritan leader who founded the town of Hartford and either wrote or inspired the first written constitution in history to form a government. Gillette's middle name was Hooker. Gillette had 3 brothers and a sister. Another sister named Mary died as a small child. His eldest brother, Frank Ashbel Gillette, went to California and died there in 1859 from tuberculosis. The third oldest brother, Robert, joined the Union Army and served in the Antietam campaign. He came home sick, recovered, and joined the Navy. Robert Gillette was assigned to the USS Gettysburg and took part in both assaults on Fort Fisher. He was killed the morning after the surrender of the fort when the powder magazine exploded. Gillette would be enamored with large sounds his entire life. Gillette's brother Edward moved to Iowa, and his sister Elizabeth married George Henry Warner, both in 1863, after which William was the only child in the household. As a result, he was spoiled by his parents. His father, Francis, held the strongest objections to the theater in general, but he offered the least resistance and drove William to the train station in 1873, telling his 20-year-old son that he had driven two other sons to this same station and they had never returned. William was to make sure that he was the exception. Francis supplied him with an allowance on which he was to subsist. His apprenticeship was without pay. Gillette never forgot it, and when his father's health began to fail in 1878, he forsook the stage for more than a year to care for him in his final illness. The 3-story plus tower, 24-room, 1,400 square foot home was built of wood, cement, and local Connecticut fieldstone, supported by a steel framework. The exterior of Gillette Castle is covered in fieldstone. Woodwork within the home is hand-hewn southern white oak. In some places, beams were set directly into the stones, anchored only by cement. The walls, in particular, were constructed similarly to a stage set, lacking 2x4 studs and mortar. It has been noted it was a wonder the building didn't collapse before the castle's multi-million-dollar restoration a few years ago. Insulation included native seaweed and paper, a remarkable thing since insulation today contains plasticizers, which are heavy pollutants. It took 20 workers from 1914 to 1919, just 5 years, to complete the construction, totaling a cost of over $1 million at the time. In 2015, audiences thrilled to Gillette performing as Sherlock Holmes in a 2-hour 1916 silent film, miraculously restored after its rediscovery in 2014 as a nitrate negative. At the first of a few special showings at Gillette Castle State Park, sponsored by the park's dedicated Friends group, journalists from the Hartford Courant saw Gillette's ghost as a fluttering, grainy, cinematic ectoplasm. On screen, Gillette was commanding, elegant, magnetic. Where other actors used exaggerated movements and facial expressions common to silent movies, Gillette was powerfully understated, so adept at his craft that the slightest gesture or look enlarged the plot. However, he was hopeless at romantic comedies. Gillette's practice was adopted by William Powell decades later, who also starred in an early Sherlock Holmes film with John Barrymore, both of whom you can learn about on this channel. Perhaps both men were in some of Gillette's audiences on Broadway. William Gillette used gaslight as a stage prop during the time when electricity was making its way into the theater. Because the theaters in which Gillette worked had both gas and electricity, Gillette used gas as a stage prop to actualize reality while illuminating the stage with electric light. He was hired as a playwright, director, and actor for $50 a week in 1881 while performing in Cincinnati by two of the Frohman brothers, Gustav and Daniel. The Frohman brothers had a powerful monopoly on theater, and their brother Charles Frohman, who you can learn about on this channel, was arguably one of the most powerful. The first play Gillette wrote and produced was The Professor. It debuted in the Madison Square Theater, lasting 151 performances, with a subsequent tour through many states. That same year, he produced Esmeralda, written together with Frances Hodgson Burnett of A Secret Garden and A Little Princess fame. Early in his career, Gillette realized it would be in the triple role of playwright, director, and actor that he could make the most money. He wrote his own work with an eye for development. He was among the premier matinee idols of the day with his strong jawline and dark looks. He had a heightened sense of the dramatic, and his two most riveting scenes are still considered to be among the most dramatic scenes in the history of the American theater: the hospital scene in Held by the Enemy and the telegraph office scene in Secret Service. His ability to recreate a battle scene, influenced by his Civil War veteran brother, was remarkable, as he would recreate the noises of screaming missiles, cannon fire, and thunder. He was also a pioneer in making American drama American, rejecting what had been, up until that point, a pervasive European influence on American theater, at a time when American art of all kinds was held in very low esteem by the British. Gillette realized American theater needed something extra to compete with the centuries of Shakespearean practice by the British, and so he turned to special effects. During an 1886 production of Held by the Enemy, Gillette introduced a new method of simulating the galloping of a horse. Men formerly had slammed halves of coconut shells on a slab of marble to simulate the sound, but Gillette found this clumsy. Patent number 38928 was applied for and issued, entitled Method of Producing Stage Effects, with Gillette as the only inventor. It was a method introducing a new and useful method of imitating the sound of a horse approaching, departing, or passing at a gallop, trot, or other desired gait, the same to be used in producing stage effects. His method consisted in beating with clappers that represent the hooves of a horse upon some material that serves to represent the roadbed. It was not the first patent which he had applied for and received. In 1883, he filed the first of 4 patent requests with the United States Patent and Trademark Office for a time stamp, as stamps upon the upper surface of papers a dial, and one or more dial pointers representing the time of day at which the papers stamped by it were respectively so stamped. All 4 requests were granted. Time stamps, as they would become known, are a critical component of legal and bureaucratic work today. According to one local, visiting the castle may, quote, change your life if you're not careful. In 2012, a visitor said, I did get the sense that the place is definitely inhabited by things other than humans, but nothing seriously threatening. The entire place holds a certain comfort and peace. It is indeed strange, but inviting nonetheless. In 2013, a local resident remembered speaking to Gillette's sister on the phone, as she had moved to the area. So Gillette Castle holds memories of more than just William Gillette. In 1882, Gillette married Helen Nichols of Detroit. She was 22 and nicknamed Ella. He was 29. She and he met during a Detroit performance of The Professor when he spotted her in the audience. Their romance blossomed, and the wedding was scheduled to take place in Windsor, Ontario, where some of Helen's family lived. They were married, and a few months later, showing perhaps his native New England reticence, as well as his dry sense of humor, Gillette wrote to American actress and one of Senate's bathing beauties, blonde Alice C. Day, Ed and I have fun sometimes. He got married a while ago. So I did. We both have pretty fair wives. They treat us very well. Helen traveled with her husband as his play, The Private Secretary, toured the country. She was genteel and beautiful, thoughtful and sweet, and ladylike in every way. She possessed the same warm, caring nature Gillette was accustomed to at home, as well as social skills, which he often lacked despite having a wide acquaintance. She liked to read, had relatives in the East, and shared many of her husband's interests. She enjoyed traveling and sharing his life on the road, and the welfare she was most concerned about was not hers, but his. The family appeared to agree that it was a good match, Isabella declaring that the bride was perfectly suited to his whole nature, she being one of his family members. Helen took care of him when he was sick, which seems to have been quite often due to his work schedule, and was a warm and loving companion. They had no children, but they enjoyed an idyllic time of shared devotion, and in no time at all, Helen became a beloved member of the Gillette family. During the summer of 1888, Helen began having painful abdominal attacks. They were in Greenwich, Connecticut, in August 1888 when she was taken ill with what was found to be an inflamed appendix. This was very painful. The first diagnostic signs of appendicitis would not be described until 1889, and the surgical incision in the lower part of the abdomen for removal of the inflamed part of the appendix would not be described until 1893. Only after that was surgical removal of an inflamed appendix practicable. As it was, Helen had no recourse and was ahead of her time. She died at 2 a.m. on September 1st, 1888, at age 28 after just 6 years of marriage. Gillette never remarried. In 1897, Gillette met Japanese immigrant Yukitaka Osaki and hired him to work on his houseboat, the Holy Terror, and a few years later, his newly commissioned boat, Aunt Polly. Osaki eventually became Gillette's valet, assistant, stage dresser for his performances, and close companion for over 4 decades until Gillette's death. Gillette was very fond of cats, at one time shared his home, Gillette Castle, with up to 17 cats and 2 pet frogs. You may think this is interesting, as both species have been cited as witches' familiars in various witchcraft trials from the early 1600s and 1700s. For these animals, Gillette designed finely crafted cat toys. Osaki was actually from upper middle class Japanese society. While he lived in the United States for most of his life, his older brother Yukio became a well-known politician in Japan, who considers him their, quote, god of constitutional politics. During his tenure as mayor of Tokyo, Yukio facilitated Japan's 1912 gift of the famous cherry trees that now surround the tidal basin in Washington, D.C. and comprise the Cherry Blossom Festival. The presence and importance of America in the late 1800s is really impressive that the brother of a Japanese mayor would consider it worth his while to live with an American actor for decades. Gillette provided Osaki with his own small house on the southern corner of the property, close to the river and the village of Hadlime. Osaki lived there for the rest of his life with his mule, donkey, and gardens. He was a common sight in town, picking up mail and running other errands for himself and Gillette. By all accounts, over the 4 decades that Osaki worked for Gillette, the two men became close friends, and Osaki also helped decorate the castle. When he died in 1937, Gillette provided for Osaki in his will, leaving him the use of his small house and gardens for the rest of Osaki's life. Having retired from most of his duties years before, Osaki remained in Hadlime for the remainder of his life, but is remembered by locals as declining mentally and physically until his death on the estate in 1942. Today, Osaki's house is part of Gillette Castle State Park, but it is not currently open to the public, and I could not find a reason why. Gillette was an imaginative workhorse. He wrote 13 plays and 2 novels, created many trick stage props and lighting effects, and performed into his 80s. 2 pieces based on the Civil War remain his greatest works, Held by the Enemy of 1886 and Secret Service 1896. Part of their popularity is they were written without total bias and did not demonstrate the anti-South sentiment that is so common today. Gillette took stage acting from melodramatic Victorian elocution to the more natural approach experienced today. He designed his eccentric 24-room mansion himself with 3-foot-thick walls. For amusement, he built a 3-mile-long narrow-gauge railroad, Connecticut Nutmeg, on the property and sped with frightened guests at the edge of 100-foot-plus cliffs along the Connecticut River in a sort of early theme park. The material for the castle was carried up the tramway designed by him, and he loved the location, away from the hustle and bustle of Broadway. During the 5 years of construction, from 1914 to 1919, he lived aboard his houseboat, the Aunt Polly, named after a North Carolina woman who allegedly tended to him when he was sick, or at a home he had purchased in Greenport, Long Island. His miniature railroad was his personal pride. It traveled all around the property, crossing several bridges, and going through one tunnel designed by Gillette. Hollywood actors, including Charlie Chaplin, rode the train. The train was relocated after his death to an amusement park, Lake Compounce in Bristol, Connecticut, which still exists, from 1943 through the mid-90s. Since then, both locomotives have been returned to the castle, where one has been restored and is on display in the visitor center. Gillette's will stated, "I would consider it more than unfortunate for me should I find myself doomed after death to a continued consciousness of the behavior of mankind on this planet, to discover that the stone walls and towers and fireplaces of my home, founded at every point on the solid rock of Connecticut, that my railway line with its bridges, trestles, tunnels through solid rock, and stone culverts and underpasses all built in every particular for permanence, so far as there is such a thing, that my locomotives and cars constructed on the safest and most efficient mechanical principles, that these and many other things of a like nature should reveal themselves to me as in the possession of some blithering saphead who had no conception of where he is or with what surrounded. With regards to efficient mechanical principles, Gillette liked to ride his motorcycle at harrowing speeds. At age 65, his brakes failed while heading to the ferry below the castle, and he rode across the dock, over the ferry, and into the river. A number of oddities exist inside the house that were personally designed by Gillette and said to be examples of his creative genius. These include 47 individually created doors and door locks throughout the castle. Each door is equipped with an external steampunk-like latch, intricately carved of wood. Trick locks made unlocking these doors a puzzle. Unique furnishings, including built-in couches and a movable table on tracks, light switches of carved wood, a grand upper-floor balcony running the length of the downstairs main room. The walls on the second floor are notably short. This architectural feature is theorized to have been used to enhance Gillette's already tall stature, making him appear even taller to guests looking up at him from below. A hand-carved bar, which opened with a secret latch and could disappear during Prohibition. A series of mirrors above the Great Hall, allowing him to view visitors from his bedroom. The design is thought to have helped Gillette spy on his guests and make a dramatic entrance. A fire suppression system complete with a water tower integrated into the home's design that feeds a unique manual fire sprinkler on the second floor overlooking the large living room. Secret doors, passageway, and room. A secret door near the staircase leading to the rest of the home allowed Gillette to swiftly, unexpectedly, and theatrically appear to welcome or startle his guests. The secret room is only accessible by a staircase revealed after pulling down a handle. The room is small and contains a fireplace. Is this where Gillette thought of some of his inventions? A grand wooden staircase to the upper floors. The home was decorated with a number of Tiffany lamps made of broken bottle fragments collected and given to Gillette by his friends. It also had a heated bed. Walls are hung with Javanese raffia mats, likely due to Osaki's influence. Gillette was a better actor and dramatist than builder, said former Parks director Pamela Adams, despite the fact that Gillette Castle is still standing. Some of the beams were directly placed into the stone with cement and had withered to almost pencil thin. The walls were built like a lathe, like a stage set, not 2x4 studs, and mortar was lacking in critical places. The castle was sold for just $5,000 in 1938. Could any ill feelings come from somewhere other than Gillette, who clearly loved his home? James McEnther broke into the palace to do drugs in 1967 and wrote about it. Other people probably broke in as well, until the Connecticut authorities were able to get the 128-acre estate under control. With the deaths of Gillette Osaki on the estate, Gillette's wife nearby, as well as the spirits of the Gillette siblings and the shipwrecked Aunt Polly, have you ever seen anything supernatural at Gillette Castle?